Thank you very much, Mr. MC. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming to this presentation. Like he said, I've got 3 supervisors, and I'm glad one of my supervisors, Carol, is here, and Camille will be coming shortly, and Professor Ian Shell, I don't think will be able to make it. And I also want to acknowledge Dr. Love Chile, who was my supervisor for my MPhil. Thank you very much for your support. So this is my topic. I'm looking at employment challenges that are faced by Africans who are domiciled in New Zealand. This is the outline of my presentation. Today I'm just going to tell you about what I have discovered so far in terms of my preliminary findings. I am likely to do my first draft by end of this year, and if all goes well, probably submit early next year. So I've done all my interviews, transcribed, done the analysis, and I think tomorrow I'm finishing my discussion topic. Then weekend, I'm starting my conclusion limitations topic. Right, so today I'm just going to be telling you the findings in 15 minutes. I think that I've done three years, so that's not a joke. Right, like I said, these are preliminary findings I'm going to be sharing with you. These are just basic definitions, keywords in my presentation. And basically, this is my entire thesis. I am going to, since I'm looking at African communities in New Zealand, I have decided to choose an African methodology that speaks to the hearts of the people that I'm talking about, and hence I'm using the African oral tradition paradigm of storytelling, and it is embedded or impregnated by the concept of Ubuntu, which basically means I am what I am because of you. We believe in extended families, and the theory that I'll be using for my research is the labor disadvantage theory, which basically says a lot of people, migrants, refugees, predominantly worldwide, they have been forced to get into business. Not they want to, but because of the system that is very evil, that is very systematic. So people have been pushed to get into business against their wish. So this is part of the storytelling I'll be using, and all my participants, 20 individuals, are all Africans, and I had 4 big focus groups, and background, they are refugees and migrants, and this is the difference. If I had time, I was going to tell you more about the difference between refugees and migrants, huge differences between the two. Right, and these are the themes. I had a lot of themes out of the interviews that I had with my participants, and then 10 themes were very conspicuous. They were very, very outstanding. So these are the 10 themes that I'm going to be talking about, time permitting. The participants, both the communities. In other words, let me say this research is so unique in New Zealand and worldwide in the sense that it is focusing more on communities. We are listening at the voices of the communities as opposed to individuals. Yes, I had 20 participants, individual participants. In addition to that, 4 different unique focus groups. So this thesis is going to be focusing on communities, and they are speaking on behalf of community members. So that makes it very unique. So my participants or communities, they basically said one of the major reasons in terms of being an employment challenge in New Zealand is racism and discrimination. And when I was doing my discussion topic, I wrote almost 50 pages just on this particular topic. The stories that I had were heartbreaking, very sad stories. You may begin to wonder, is this New Zealand, or we are living in another land where it is being managed by Taliban or whatever? It was so bad, because racism is basically one of the major issues to do with employment. Africans, qualified guys who are competent, who can deliver. Some of them are actually cleaners. Some of them are taxi drivers. I'm a good example. When I came from Zimbabwe 15 years ago, I was an executive with an insurance company, and prior to that, I'd worked as an HR manager, human resources manager in a very, very big company. But my first job in New Zealand, I was a toilet cleaner, or for all places in Wellington, the capital city of New Zealand. So these are the some of the stories and issues that are to do with racism and discrimination. Skin color, it's a big issue to do with racism and discrimination. Name-based. We had one guy who was called Sam. And he applied for, he's a qualified architect in New Zealand. Went to invest in New Zealand, primary New Zealand, because his name was a typical African name. He could not get a job. He took a Kiwi friend, a lady friend, family friend. He changed his name to Sam, and he got a job. Right now, he's just speaking, he's working. So the moment he changed his name from Tuwe to Sam, he got a job. So there are a lot of subtle forms of different racism in speech, in body language, which called the pedagogics. So subtle racism can be presented in many different forms, and some of the forms are very elusive, very hidden. If you're not smart, you may not even be able to pick it up. The people, the way they talk, the way the gestures, the colloquial language that they at times use. So it was a huge issue in terms of form of racism, subtle racism. And also, we had a lot of stories from, for example, the Zimbabweans who are based in the UK at the moment are actually called BBC, which is British Bottom Cleaners. They're actually professors, engineers, accountants who are professionals. They're actually cleaning old people in rest homes in the UK, and some are called bump technicians. And these are all people with D3 jobs, which means dirty, dangerous, and difficult. These are jobs that are left for the majority of Africans, refugees, and migrants. The next theme is basically to do with English language proficiency, as English in New Zealand is the language of commerce. If you don't understand English, or if you cannot carry a reasonable conversation in English in New Zealand, it will be very difficult for you to get a job. So the issue of language was actually a classic one in general. So the next item there is to do with accent. Hey, what does accent to do with competence? If I can be able to communicate clearly a message that you understand, surely every one of us is an accent. I'm very proud of my African accent because it depicts, or it denotes, or it underpins my culture. I'm very proud. Americans, they've got their own accent. Canadians, they do have. I've got Irish friends. I can hardly hear or understand what they are saying. You know, French, you can't even understand what they're talking about. So the issue of accent was really mentioned as one of those barriers to do with Africans getting employment in New Zealand. But guys were saying, look here, we've got a lot of guys. I worked for the Human Resources Department in Zimbabwe, and I employed British guys because we're a British colony in Zimbabwe. We employed heaps of guys from Europe. Some New Zealanders were under my portfolio back home, but we never questioned them out to say, drop your Kiwi accent, drop your French accent. But in New Zealand, the issue of accent means quite a lot. A lot of guys could not even get jobs because of their accents. But we're saying, hey, we need to grow up. We're living in the 21st century. Accent has nothing to do with competence. The other thing is the so-called Kiwi experience. I'm saying so-called because my participants are basically saying it is usually New Zealand that is so fascinated about the thing that is called the Kiwi experience. Surely a motor mech who's trained in Zimbabwe or in Africa, in Burundi, wherever, has the capability and the competencies to be able to fix cars in New Zealand. So for me, there is no need really to look for the Kiwi experience unless the job demands that you need to have the local experience. But how many jobs do demand that? You know? If I'm an accountant, yes, I understand if you ask me to do one paper to do with taxation, because taxation is different from country to country, I would understand that. If I'm an accountant, I'll just simply do the paper and then be able to do the job, to do the figures. So the issue of New Zealand local experience was one of the areas. And some of them, hey, I've been in the country for a week or a few days. You are asking me to have 10 years experience, 5 years experience. Where do I get that? So it was really quite an issue. So we had a lot of some stories. How much time do I have? 5 minutes. Great. Yeah. So we had a lot of stories to do with, like I said, I used the African story telling. So everything was in form of stories. So it was very, very fascinating. So all these issues are actually based on different stories from the participants or from the communities in general. Then overseas qualifications, it's another issue again. And people are saying NZQA represents the government in terms of ratifying and assessing the qualifications. But hey, a lot of employers, the unscrupulous employers in New Zealand, they don't respect the decision made by government department, NZQA, they don't respect some of those qualifications. So they were basically saying there are some qualifications, and one guy was actually saying he did his mechanical engineering from the University of Zimbabwe about almost 30 years ago. And for information, University of Zimbabwe was by then one of the best universities in the world. And they actually said the degree from Zimbabwe in terms of mechanical engineering has more content and more depth compared to the local New Zealand mechanical degree. So there were a lot of stories that were basically shared on this one. So they were basically saying overseas qualifications is actually one of the barriers. The other issue, big one, cultural issue. Like I said, every one of us has a culture, and we must be proud of our cultures. And nobody under the blue sky has a right to marginalize people in terms of practicing their culture, as long as it does not offend the other person, as long as we display the goodness of our culture in a nice and respectful manner. That's not a problem. But however, the issue of culture was actually mentioned. Some people have said, no, they cannot fit in the New Zealand culture, what you call organizational fit or personality fit, or they don't have the chemistry. We can't work with these guys because we don't click. The chemistry does not do its own thing. So a lot of things were actually mentioned about the issue of culture, and also the issue of the old boys clubs, you know, whereby people do their own thing together. They don't want to mix with other people. So the issue of culture was one of them. And unemployment rates, worldwide, the rates of unemployment is actually on top of the roof. But in New Zealand, we're talking about plus or minus 5%. But however, the research was basically saying for the average New Zealanders, it's actually about 5% unemployment, but for the Africans, it's about 12%. So there is a difference of 7%. So that's really an issue. There is high employment within the African community compared to other ethnic communities and also the mainstream New Zealand society. And the issue of underemployment, a lot of qualified guys from Africa are highly qualified, but they're underemployed and they are underpaid. Guys who are doctors, driving taxis, accountants, engineers, being cleaners, you know, that's not fair. Like I said, I was an executive, but my first job, I was a toilet cleaner. It's not funny. I also want to enjoy to get a good job, have a good salary, enjoy with my wife and my children, as you also want to do. So it would be very unfair for you to pay me, to underpay me. That's not fair. The other issue of promotions, qualified guys, they were used to train other people who later got promoted. Their subordinates. They trained them and they later became their bosses. Many, many stories about this one. Then the last issue is about religion. That one is really a factor. It was actually mostly talking about the Muslims. You know, people were saying, basically, employers were basically saying, you guys, we employ you to come and work, not to come and pray. So there were a lot of issues that were talked about on this one. So my take here, I respect religion, but we need to be, I was telling the African communities to say, hey, you go to work not to pray, but you go to work. So if you go to work, you need to go and work. There's time to pray. You cannot just be praying everywhere else. So we need to be very sensitive and be very professional. So I think basically these are some of the references. In a nutshell, these are my 10 key points that I unpacked and unearthed. How much are we doing on time? All right? Good. Right. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you. And these are my inspirational heroes. These guys, they inspire me. Women may say, why not also have some ladies there? Right. Okay. Dr. Camille.
Last slide you talked about you telling the migrants that they've gone to work and not to pray, they have to be professional. How does praying make them less professional?
No, what I'm basically saying, there are some organizations that are so sensitive. They've actually have prayer rooms for people to pray, which is fine. So what we're basically saying, You are cases where stories were told with people online. They're on a production line, you know what I'm saying? The production line is running, and somebody time to pray comes, they leave the line unattended. That's unprofessional. So these are the issues that we're discussing. But basically we're saying you can do that during your break time. That's not a problem. There are organizations that are quite good. They provide prayer rooms for people to pray. That's okay. So we need to...
Here you are perpetuating the same type of discrimination. If the prayer time is such, that is, then the employee needs to take that into account.
That's not a problem. But what we're basically saying is, one is on the example that was given, which I also agreed with. One is on a production line. Production line is happening. And then somebody says, oh, this is my time to pray. Without making arrangements with the supervisor or managers, they just leave the line unattended. Obviously, that's not right, you know. But we are basically saying employers, they don't have a right to stand in the way of people in terms of their beliefs. But also, as workers, we need to know that these guys are in business to make money. And we need to, there were actually a lot of stories that were defied more time. There was one case in the USA. There was a fine young man who was working for one of the biggest corporations in the USA. And he was a Muslim, and he was in the marketing department. First occasion, they wanted to go to a work function, and he was supposed to be driven by a lady. He refused. He says, no, I cannot be two of us in a lady. They hired a taxi, and again, he refused. On the second occasion, there was another event outside the company, and he said, was alcohol going to be served? And they said yes, and he refused. And at the end of the internship, he could not make it. He totally lost the job. So the comments were basically saying, this young man was intelligent. He was supposed to use his mind and be able to balance the act. No one had said, don't pray. You know what I'm saying? But he took it too far. So what we're basically saying, employers need to be sensitive, need to be fair on employees who are Christians, who are Muslim, Buddhists, whatever. Employees also need to respect their employers to balance the scale. Right. Any other questions? There was a hand here. Okay.
Since there are no other questions, I want to pursue that because discrimination is discrimination, no matter in what form. So if you're saying the employers are there to make money, then why would they hire a black person if they think that is going to turn away customers? So if they're going to hire somebody who's going to leave to pray because it is somebody, why would they hire that person? So you can't have it both ways.
Yes, I can answer that question. We had actually in Auckland, we're so much privileged to have one of the owners who's a friend of mine. He owns one of the biggest pack and save shop. And if you go to his store, it's United Nations. You know, you find all races of the world. And most of the guys are actually Muslim. And during Ramadan, he actually makes some arrangements to make sure our Muslim brothers and sisters, they are accommodated. And he's quite happy. And for years, he has actually had a lot of royalty from guys from the Muslim. So here's a guy who is an employer, who is employer who is very sensitive. And also the employers are very committed to the business and to the organization. Why? Because there is what you call dual responsibility, where employers and the employees, they meet halfway in a very sensible way to make sure that, you know, there is a viability in the business and also their welfare is also looked after. So this is what basically we are looking for. We are saying employers must not oppress their employees. We're also saying employees need to be sensitive. They're not going to the synagogue or to the church, but they're going to work. So they need that balance, know what I'm saying? But racism is, Camille is shaking his head there. Racism is racism. It's a no. But we need to be very conscious and sensitive. Any more questions? Thank you. Oh, all right. Yeah.
I'm just interested in this slide about some of them being forced to do PhD.
Sorry?
There's one in one of the slides mentioning about they have to go into different program, like PhD. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Which slide?
I can't remember which one.
PhD.
Yeah, that's the one.
I just missed it.
Not that one. Yep, that's the one.
This one?
Also to other programs PhD. What does that mean?
Which one? Oh, okay. Yes. Because of unemployment, I've got a friend of mine who is actually one of these universities in Auckland. He didn't want to do a PhD program, but he could not get, he's a qualified banker, he has a master's and everything else. He could not get a job. And he was on a visa, and his visa was expiring. So he had to now that he was not employed, he had to look for a place to do a PhD program so that at least he could actually have legal status to live in New Zealand. So in other words, he was cajoled and forced to do a PhD program that he had not planned. And that is not right. Simply because he could not get a job, he was forced to do something else. And I've got a lot of cases like this. Some have done masters, and some have been forced to do different programs, things that they did not want to do, you know.
But even if you have a PhD and there's no job, so it goes back to square one.
And this guy had a master's, so he was forced into PhD. And we've got PhD holders who cannot get jobs in New Zealand here. PhD guys who are driving taxis. Accountants, friend of mine, driving taxis. I was a toilet cleaner. That was my first job. You think I'm a toilet cleaner myself? I did. I couldn't get a job.
Thank you, Tuwe. Give a couple of applause to-
Thank you.